Sometimes, unfortunately, I advise some of my clients to abandon the land they plan to build on and simply run off, sell that land, and I ask them to buy someplace else. Now, that might be a little strange, but stay with me for more details throughout the video. Good morning, friends. It's another wonderful, wonderful morning in the village. We are filming at a slightly different undisclosed location, not too far from Karating. If you're joining us for the first time, we usually film from Karating and other neighborhoods within. But today we are filming at an undisclosed location. I have a client who sent me to check out this piece of property where she hopes to build her retirement land. So what I'm actually doing is an initial site visit to see the exact piece of land that she plans to build on. Now, typically, I don't do this myself because often it is cost prohibitive. Because just the cost of fuel alone, just driving to some of these places, may be beyond my means or maybe beyond the consultancy fee. So in many cases, I send one of my guys to take public transportation and check it out. But the good news, however, is that this particular site is very close to my home, literally less than 20 minutes. So the drive is not a big deal, and it's on my way actually to Kisumu town. So I could easily stop by and check it out. So this is going to be an initial site visit just to get a sense as to what we're going to deal with. And I'll walk you through some of the things my guys do whenever they're sent out to do an initial site visit. Now, as some of you already know, we consult with diasporans about construction, land, and all matters that affect Kenyans that live away from home. So if you are interested in any of that stuff, feel free to reach out to us on the number that I posted down below. So here we are again, getting ready for another exciting project. Now, this is a project that I hope will be initiated possibly early next year and might run over the course of a year or longer, depending on how prepared the client is. But we've already done the first two steps. We are moving on with the planning part, and that includes what we're doing today, which is the initial site visit. So as I said earlier, this part is often done by other folks, not myself. But whenever possible, especially when I'm home, if it's a drivable distance, I don't mind checking it out. But when it's too far for me to drive, I send my other folks. In fact, one of my teams just came back from Marsabit. I'd never imagined at some point I would have anything to do with Marsabit, but I'm excited. A second team just came back from Diani. Of course, those are not places I'm going to drive all the way to check them out. My folks do just as good of a job as I could in person, and it works just fine. So today, let's focus on reviewing this site. I'm going to tell you all the details about the things we pay attention to, what we found looking at this site, so that if you're one of those people who is getting ready to build something in the village, you should be a little bit more informed rather than just flying blind. Now, I've done a whole video on issues land, especially in the village. Remember, land in the village is not the same thing as land in the city. There may be overlap in terms of issues and similarity across, but land in the village has very unique issues that you likely will not run into the city. So if you're curious to know more about issues of land, please check out the link on the description section below, where I'm posting the link to the video that I talked about land. So I won't talk about everything there is about land. I just want to walk you through what an initial site visit looks like. Oh, and by the way, I'm just chit-chatting a random neighbor who just graciously stopped by to ask questions, and she's curious. This is one of the most important parts of doing initial site visit, making sure you're chit-chatting the people you find there, whether it's the mamamboga, that random person talking, the person selling stuff right there, the shopkeeper, the neighbors, workers, the people you find around. I am telling you, you are going to get a lot of very valuable information. And I love talking to people, especially the shamba boys and the village drunkards. Those folks will be very invaluable, as this woman was. The information this woman shared was just incredibly invaluable. And so whenever you do site visit, I encourage you, please talk to the people you run into. Be very friendly, chat them. They will volunteer a lot of information that will be super critical. as regards deciding whether or not you really want to live at a place. So that's what we started with in the morning, just chit-chatting neighbors. And so, anyway, so why would I advise a client to literally abandon their property and move on to buy someplace else? I know that's really strange, but I've done that on occasion. There are times I walk into a place or I get a report and I tell a client, I don't think this is a good idea. Let's try something else. And sometimes, unfortunately, I've had one case where a client ignored me, and unfortunately, things did not work out. I'm very sad about it. It's not something that I brag about, but it's just unfortunate that the client didn't see some of the challenges that we had anticipated having visited that particular area. Because again, with the village, most folks are buying land to build retirement homes, places they hope to live for a long time. And so if you don't do your homework, you're going to run into some major problems. And a home is not like a car. Because you can buy a car, if you don't like it, you put it on the market, sell it the next day. A home in a village is a whole different beast. If you build and you don't like it, or you build and you realize there are major problems, I promise you, getting rid of homes in the village is very difficult. So the homework that has to be done before you build is beyond critical. And I'm going to walk you through that. So again, one may ask, what criteria do I use to determine if a specific plot of land is ideal for the client's taste? Because usually by the time I get to this piece of land, I already know so much about what the client is envisioning. So what criteria do we use before we recommend a go or not? And then lastly, what does an initial site visit entail in terms of the details? How do we go about this? And so I'm sharing this so you can actually do it on your own. You don't have to wait for people like us to do it. I'm sharing that information so you can handle it on your own if you can. So let me walk you through the steps involved with this initial landscape. Number one, as we drive towards that particular piece of land, the first thing we look at is accessibility. What do the roads look like? And in this case, it's one of the really good things that our client here has, that the roads are just perfect. It seems like these are roads that even when it rains, they should be relatively stable. And that means you can start building at any time of the year. You can bring materials at a lower cost because it's not such a hassle to bring materials. So we look at accessibility. We look at the state of the road, whether they are worn out, whether they need fixing, because in some cases we actually have had to fix the roads before we start construction. So when you're doing your initial site visit, please check accessibility. How close is it to the main road? And will this be a problem for people supplying materials to you? Because if it is a problem, then it will also influence when you can start and how much it'll cost you to actually bring things to the site. Now, the second thing we look at when you're doing an initial site visit is proximity to amenities, things such as power. Remember, oftentimes when you're building, you have people living on site for an extended period of time. You can't expect them to live there in the dark. At some point, you'll be using power tools. And then later on, your home likely will be connected to the national grid. So we look at power. And in many cases, when we don't have direct access to power, I recommend smaller solar units. So once you build your site house and you have somebody living there, then you put in a small solar unit that allows the masons that live there to be able to use lighting and to charge their phones. So we look at access to power. We look at access to water, because of course there is no construction without water. And later on, after you live there, you'll need water. And water, the issue of water comes in two ways. One, there could be people who have access to rivers or city water, but then in many cases, we actually need to drill a borehole. If you live in a very rocky place, then that may be a big challenge. Drilling boreholes in rocky areas is a major problem. So then you have to have a plan for alternate sources of water for the construction process and the permanent sources of water that will be used once your home is complete. Then we look at other utilities, which again, this is more like luxury. Like where we live in Kaiteng, we are not too far from the nearest fiber optic line that goes to Maseno University. Something like that could be really helpful so that you're not stuck with Elon Musk stuff. You have the option of just using good old Safaricom, but fiber optic, which is exceptionally reliable. So we assess any other utilities that may be necessary. In this case, the utilities that are needed are not too far from the client's area. Oh, and by the way, this is the neighbor's shamba boy that also stopped by. I said hi. I make friends with people like these folks. Take their numbers, do what I gotta do, because I promise you, these folks will help you not just when you're on site, but even when you're off site. If they see something else going on, they call you. So I encourage you to connect with these folks, as I said earlier. Now, the third thing we look at with the initial site visit is any potential neighborhood problems like security. So, unfortunately, for my client, this particular client, that's one of the things that I learned while talking to this young man, that apparently there are folks who take the liberty to simply steal anything and everything on this property. The client had already planted Kaepo, had put some temporary fencing, that somebody just came and removed each and every single thing on the property. So clearly, I already know there's a security issue. So what that means is that it might change the plan for construction, such that instead of starting with the house, you may start by addressing the security issues like building your perimeter wall before you build a house. Places with minimal security issues, you can go straight to a house. So you assess security by just chit-chatting folks, getting a sense of what's going on. You look at issues like noise. This particular place is actually notorious with rock crushing machines. So there are neighborhoods not too far from here that have these very noisy machines that are used to crush ballast. So if we walk in and we notice there's such a problem, then often we advise clients that if they're going to build there, they need to keep that in mind, that they're going to have issues with dust and noise. So we look at that. Then consideration number 4 is ownership issues. Again, these are things you will learn a lot by just chit-chatting neighbors. Like in this particular case with our client, I also learned that, in fact, the previous owner had brought another person to purchase this land. So it looks like somebody was trying to resell an already sold land. But those were issues that were resolved. But I could already tell there was some ownership issues. So those things need to be cleared before you invest any money on land. Be sure that your legal claim to the land is watertight. You don't want to start building and then you are running in courts for another 15 years with a stalled project. So ownership issues, make sure that's clear. We also check the documents to make sure that everything checks out. And then we also, if possible, we try and contact previous owners just to make sure that there are no nefarious activities that are going on. So again, this is also the neighbor across, the shamba boy for the neighbor across, super helpful. Gave all kinds of information. And again, these folks are incredibly useful. Then we also look at the difference between the reality on the ground versus the maps that we get. Sometimes you have neighbors who have already encroached. And so the land on the map may be really big, but on the ground, it's really, really small. So this is where our tape measures come out. We pull the tapes, get a sense of the measurement. We look at the boundaries where the fences line just to make sure that what's on the map is what's on the ground, because the architect use the maps that we send them, because typically they don't get the chance to come and see the land. And so if we give them a wrong map and then they draw something that is not going to fit on this particular piece, then we have a problem. So we check the measurements, we check the boundaries, and just make sure that whatever we have on paper matches what's on the ground. And then we also look at other features of the land that are on the land, things such as terrain. Is it a place that is very slopey? Are there rocks on it? Are there holes in there like there are in this particular case? Are there trees that need to be uprooted, or there are trees that are appropriately planted? What type of soil is there? What's the drainage like? So the features of the land are really, really critical, because much of this will determine the cost of construction in this area. I'm currently working with a client, like I said earlier, that I'm really advising her to just buy land elsewhere. And I'll explain to you why that is later on. And then we also look at other existing pros with the particular land. Some pieces of land already have fences built, have site houses, have toilets, have very friendly neighbors. So those things are really good. And we look for such options. Like in this particular case, our client's relative lives right across the road. And the home of our client's relative has all these amenities we're talking about. So that is a massive, massive advantage that works for our client. And then, so if you are to ask, why would I advise a client to run away from land they've bought? The first reason, often when there's a big gap between the budget and the terrain at hand. Like I have a client who has 2.5 million to build, and she wants to build in an extremely hilly area. I know that entire budget could easily go and disappear in the foundation. So she lives in a place where she could easily buy a land for $500,000, which is 500,000, and build something modest at 2 million. Now that's not a lot of money in construction, but she can get something. So when the budget is so far away in comparison to terrain, I always advise clients to just take a minute and think about alternatives. Then when you have extremely wild neighbors, I tell folks, you do not want to live amongst very hostile folks. Yes, the hostilities can be there, but some neighbors are extreme. So when there are such issues, I tell folks, you sell it and go build someplace else. And then, of course, I mentioned issues of pollution. When somebody just has like a rock grinding machine right next to your property, that may be a problem. Some places are very prone to floods. And you can actually tell even by just looking at the type of plants and the type of soil there is. So if flooding is going to be an issue, I tell folks either come up with a solid plan to mitigate flooding or just move someplace else, because these things eventually come back to bite you somewhere. And then if there are problems with access, then you don't want to live there. I've had cases where the neighbors have actually taken over the roads. And so clients are sometimes even forced to buy a public road that already exists. So when accessing your property becomes a problem, then you may not necessarily want to live in that particular place. And that is also tied to the last point about land disputes. Where there are massive land disputes, you don't want to build anything. Because like I said, the courts in Kenya will take a long time to resolve some of these issues. So well, folks, I hope this video was informative enough. If it was, please hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next. Thank you.